Hello, everyone. We are getting back into Remnants of Filth, and I don't know why I feel like it's been like a week since we did our last stream, even though it was literally 2 days ago. But for some reason, it feels like it's been a million years. I'm super excited to get into it. I kind of feel like we're gonna be in like a funny, happy arc for a little while. I'm manifesting that at least because we just got Gumong back. Like, he's living at the manor with Moshi now, and I think there's gonna be a lot of antics, and I'm always excited for antics. Hello, blue turnips. Oh, I guess... No, I didn't start early. Hi. How do you pronounce your name? Is it Lali? Oh, and we are on page 99 for chapter 42. And just as a reminder, in case anyone needs it, there's a link to trigger warnings in the description. I guess I'm gonna get started. This is chapter 42, Catch Me If You Can. In the first few days, Li Wei's arrangements for Gumong were non-existent. Moshi was dissatisfied with the state of affairs. "What did I bring him to Shiha Manor for?" he demanded stormily. "It wasn't so he could just lie around here. Give him something to do today." "Not today," Li Wei replied hastily. "Why ever not? Are you taking bribes from him?" "How could I?" Li Wei said. "Besides, Gumong doesn't even know what the word bribe means." Seeing Shiha Jun's cold and handsome face stiffen and freeze over, Li Wei helplessly explained, "My lord, although Gumong learned a few rules at Loame Pavilion, he still fundamentally thinks like a beast. He's awfully wary of you because he's lost fights to you before. Now that he's got a new home, of course he's tense and on edge." Are you speaking about a person or a cat?" "I think we're talking about a wolf." Moshi was clearly angry, but Li Wei seized on his words like a lifeline anyway. He clapped his hands and said, "Ah, my lord is so wise to see it at once. Just treat him as if he were a cat." Was there anyone more opportunistic in his flattery than Li Wei? Yet it worked. After being praised so effusively, Moshi couldn't possibly continue to rebuke Li Wei. Moshi nailed him with a glare and let him keep talking. "Hi, Henry." "My lord, please think of it like this. A cat, when first taken home, is afraid of strangers," said Li Wei. "Only after it's grown familiar with its surroundings will it be willing to venture out and wander around, catch mice, and so on. Gumong is the same right now. You see, he's a complete newcomer, a stranger to everyone. He's already hiding himself away in the most godforsaken places. Yesterday, I spent a shichen looking for him. Guess where he was?" "I have no interest in where he Sorry. "I have no interest in where he secretes himself," Moshi replied coldly. That's an insane word choice. "Oh well. In short, when I finally found him, I didn't even have time to open my mouth before he scampered away." Moshi was still for a moment. "Where was he hiding?" he asked flatly. He was met by silence. The other servants nearby couldn't take much more of this. All of them truly admired how Li Wei's eye only twitched before he continued on as calmly as before. The rice barrel in the granary. He paused, then added, after he scurried inside, he even pulled the lid back on. Moshi brought his palm to his forehead, as if suffering a massive headache. So, my lord, Li Wei said, even if this subordinate did want to speak to him and assign him work, I could scarcely find him in the first place. And even if I did, he'd run away at the sight of me. Moshi had no words. Sure, this all rather made sense, but why did it put him in a foul mood? In this subordinate's opinion, Li Wei continued, we should ignore him for a few days. But don't scare him either. When he comes out on his own to sunbathe in the courtyard, I'll give him some work to do. Moshi thought it over and realized that he had no choice but to resign himself to this outcome. Give him the hardest work, he grumbled. Of course, of course. Moshi privately thought Li Wei was too much of a kiss-up, but he gave good advice more often than not. Gumong was indeed too bestial right now, creeping about like an animal who had just been brought to Shiha Manor. So Moshi carefully observed Gumong's behavior for a few days and found that, just as Li Wei had said, Gumong spent his daylight hours hiding in dark and secluded corners. His eyes shone from the shadows as he stared warily at all who passed by. He discovered that Gumong had two favorite hiding spots, one of which was the rice barrel in the granary. Once, unable to stop himself, Moshi solemnly lifted up a corner of the wooden lid with a soft clatter, revealing two glimmering motes of light staring back at him, just as expected. Moshi engaged in a staring contest with those shining pinpoints. Finding the silent stare-down deeply awkward, he replaced the lid with another clack. But Gumong evidently no longer considered the rice barrel a safe hideout. Moshi hadn't even taken 2 steps when he heard the lid clack open again behind him. He looked back to see Gumong clambering out of the rice barrel in a manner that he must have thought stealthy. As Gumong clung to the side of the barrel, he turned his head and met Moshi's gaze, his foot still suspended in midair. They stared at each other in wordless silence. In the next instant, Gumong hastily squirmed back into the barrel and closed the lid again. Curious, Moshi walked over and nudged the lid once more. This time it seemed stuck, refusing to budge in the slightest. Gumong had apparently grabbed onto the lid from the inside, engaging Moshi in a covert standoff. We have art of this. Hi, War Dove. Hi, Nina. This art is really good. You'll see Moshi's face. He's like, why am I dealing with this right now? Henry, in a manner that he must have thought stealthy, paints such a clear image. Yes, absolutely. I can, especially when it said he had his foot suspended in midair and he just stopped, I'm like, I can see that. Exasperated and amused in equal measure, Moshi rapped on the lid. What? Are you the beast of the rice barrel instead of the beast of the altar now? Gumong fidgeted inside the barrel. He pretended like he wasn't there, but kept his grip on the lid steady. Moshi tried again to speak to him, but all his words went unanswered. His mood gradually turned sullen. In the end, he flicked his sleeves and decided he would waste no more breath on Gumong. Lunatic, he muttered under his breath as he turned to leave. When he checked the granary the next day, Gumong had already abandoned the rice barrel as a hiding spot. Gumong's other favored lair was the wine cellar. After the rice barrel, this was his favorite spot to lurk during the day. However, Moshi wasn't interested in paying him another visit. After all, the wine cellar was pitch black, He'd only be able to see those two faintly glowing eyes. That interested him not at all. Late one night, Moshi was reading by lamplight when he heard rustling outside. He pried the window slightly open with his fingertips and saw Gumong pacing about by the light of the moon. Gumong's expression was mild, but his eyes were alert as they darted around his strange new surroundings. Many nights passed this way. Sometimes, Gumong crouched on a stone bench to stare spellbound at the moon. His features were always placid and his eyes vacant. On other nights, he stared blankly at the fish in the lake. From time to time, he would stick a hand in to stir up the waters, the moon's glimmering reflection bathing his silhouette in cold light. But most often of all, and this truly dumbfounded Moshi, Gumong came out to forage for food. Moshi didn't know exactly how voracious Gumong's appetite was these days, but he'd found it quite excessive the few times he'd seen Gumong eat. For example, tonight Gumong had slipped into the dining hall. One stick of incense later, he finally lurched out with considerable difficulty. Under the pristine moonlight, this thief looked impossibly huge. He had slung across his shoulders 2 bamboo baskets laden with steamed buns. A rope of sausages was coiled around his neck, and a meat pie dangled from his mouth. Moshi knew he must have taken the largest one from the basket. Gumong was also clutching a heap of boiled corn. A few ears were even pinned under his arms. "Is this a bear?" Moshi muttered behind the slightly cracked window. The bear of the altar peered around, checking that he hadn't been spotted, then loped back into the cellar at top speed. He moved so fast that a few of the corn cobs in his arms unfortunately tumbled away. Stunned, Gumong stopped in his tracks and crouched to pick up the fallen ears of corn. As soon as he moved his arms, however, the corn cobs pinned beneath them fell to the ground as well. He froze once more. After a second's thought, he shoved the corn in his hands under his arms, and then nonchalantly reached down to pick up the newly fallen cobs on the ground. But as soon as he picked up the cobs on the ground, the corn beneath his arms fell again. He repeated the cycle of retrieving and dropping the corn over and over, again and again. Moshi had no words. If Gumong was truly pretending, he didn't need to go to all the trouble of being a war general after all. He could switch careers and become an actor at the Pear Garden. There is a footnote, founded in the Tang Dynasty by Emperor Xuanzong. The Pear Garden is the oldest performing arts academy in China. Gumong stood in the courtyard in a state of complete befuddlement, staring helplessly for a long time. Eventually, he reached out a tentative hand to carefully pick a corncob off the ground. Nice. Got it. The corn under his arms fell once more. Gumong really could not understand what was going on, so he scratched his head, bewildered. The moment he did, a few corncobs tumbled out of his arms again. Moshi was silent. Perhaps it was because he couldn't stand watching any more of this stupidity. Perhaps it was because he thought Gumong's act was too flawless. Perhaps even because he sensed that Gumong wasn't putting on an act after all, and his mind was truly broken. Whatever the reason, fury roared up in Moshi's heart. Under its fiery influence, he flung the window open and thundered, "Are you dumb? Are you a pig? Can't you shove a few ears of corn into the basket on your back?" The servants in the surrounding buildings were all startled awake. They pushed open their windows to look outside, bleary-eyed. "What's going on?" someone shouted. "Are there monsters?" None of them had expected to see anything like the scene that greeted them. Silence reigned in the courtyard, yet there was no end to Moshi's rage. You don't even know how to pick up corn? The very sight of you annoys me. Even the meat pie had fallen out of Gumong's mouth. He turned his head to stare wide-eyed at Moshi. In response to Moshi's fierce and unfriendly expression, he he grabbed an ear of corn and hurled it at him without hesitation. And you dare to raise a hand against me? Moshi snapped. Although Gumong's shot had missed its target, he still turned tail and ran off with his loot. He nearly tripped in his haste to flee, but his martial foundation showed itself in this moment. In the split second before he would have fallen flat on his face, he caught himself, planting a hand on the ground. He then sprang to his feet and dashed into the cellar. Imagine you're looking at your first love, your most important person, the one you love and hate more than anyone, and he's dropping and picking up corn. Yeah, this is an experience. This really is. I was just thinking Looney Tunes. Looney Tunes, like Tom and Jerry. Each movement flowed into the next, as smooth as water, impossibly agile. So he's agile now. Under the moonlight, golden ears of corn lay scattered across the ground. The servants and Moshi were all flabbergasted. Li Wei was first to react. He slammed his window shut and extinguished his lamp at lightning speed, as though he hadn't seen a thing. The other servants weren't so lucky and ended up on the receiving end of a severe dressing down from General Mo. What do you think you're looking at? Hurry up and go to sleep. After having corn thrown at him before an audience, Moshi's bad mood lingered. He fumed the rest of the night and only managed to quell his fury by setting fire to 10 whole baskets of corn the next day. Still, he was disgruntled. As he stood by the pool feeding the fish. Sorry, I'm like, I can't read this right now. Like, what is this? Okay. As he stood by the pool, feeding the fish, he asked Li Wei through gritted teeth, "How does he have the nerve to throw things at me?" Li Wei sighed ruefully. Their Shih Jun was excellent in all respects, other than the fact that he was too fussy and had a bad temper. Thus, Li Wei cajoled Moshi as he peeled fruit for him. "Ayo, my lord, what's the point in getting mad? If you got sick, that would be bad. Isn't it just an ear of corn? No one's happy when..." Why are we speaking in rhymes? No one's happy when you're mad. Besides, what goes around comes around. Today he throws stuff at you, tomorrow you'll toss stuff at him. Just bear with it a little longer and it'll pass. Come here, my lord, have a slice of pear. Moshi thought it over and realized that he indeed had few other options. He frostily accepted the pear without a word. Looking after Gumong was indeed like caring for an animal. As the days passed, Gumong gradually lowered his guard around the people of Shiha Manor. Sometimes he would creep out during the day and find a sheltered corner from which to silently survey his surroundings. When the courtyard was empty, he would sit by the pond and peacefully sunbathe for a spell. One sunny afternoon, Moshi was meditating under a tree that seemed to be filled with squirrels preparing for winter. Not only were the leaves rustling, but every now and then a shower of fruit pits would rain down from its branches. At first, Moshi was only slightly irked But then a fruit pit smacked him squarely on the crown of his head. Never had he ever come across such an audacious little tree rat. His eyes snapped open as he glared up into the foliage, only to see Gumong perched on a branch high above. With his arms wrapped around the trunk, Gumong was shoving berries into his mouth with one hand while stuffing them into a cloth pouch with the other. His movements were rather clumsy as he grabbed branch after branch, bunch after bunch of berries. Sometimes errant fruit slipped between his fingers and tumbled to the ground like coral beads. The object that hit Moshi must have been one of these. Moshi was instantly speechless with fury. Seething quietly, he leveled a ferocious kick at the tree trunk. Berries noisily rained down from the canopy. "Gumong!" Moshi roared amid the downpour of fruit. Only then did the cheerful berry picker, Gumong, notice that someone was standing beneath the tree. He looked down, and his gaze met Moshi's. The two stared at each other for a long moment. Gumong remained silent, but his bulging cheeks twitched. He clearly had more than one berry in his mouth. "Get down from there," Moshi snapped. Gumong's cheeks moved again. He swiftly looped the little cloth pouch around his neck and clambered into a higher, denser section of branches, taking care to tuck himself completely out of sight. Moshi was on the verge of collapse. Great job. You're sure you won't fall out and die?" Gumong tossed another pit down from his perch in answer. To this, Moshi had no response. Moshi ground his teeth and endured Gumong's behavior for many long weeks, until the weather turned bitterly cold. One day, Moshi got out of bed to see Liwei waiting outside his room. When he saw Moshi push open the door, he bowed and said, "My lord." Moshi glanced at him. Court was not in session today, and Liwei wouldn't wait for him like this without reason. Moshi asked blandly, "Did something happen at the Bureau of Military Affairs?" Liwei offered him an ingratiating smile. "No, it's a different piece of good news." Downpour of fruit, alternative title of any meat bun work. Yes. That is the end of the chapter. I don't know how I'm going to survive this today. I think I know what this means, but we're on chapter 43, which is titled Use Me Then. When Moshi arrived at the main hall, Gumong was waiting there. "I spoke to him this morning. He didn't really respond, but he's not running away anymore," Liwei said. "It seems he's settled in, so I'll give him some work to do starting tomorrow." Moshi's tall, stern silhouette remained still and silent in the doorway. His face showed no sign of cheer. After a while, he asked coolly, "Why is this person in my chair?" Moshi took his meals at the yellow rosewood table in the hall. Although 2 chairs were usually placed on either side of it, one was always empty. No one had ever sat in it. A clueless servant had once tried to take it away and provoked Shihajun's deepest displeasure. The servants had 2 guesses about the presence of this chair. First, that the seat was saved for Princess Mengzi, and second, that the lord was such a perfectionist that the table had to look symmetrical. Not even Liwei knew which was the truth. The other seat at the head of the table had always belonged to Moshi. Yet at this moment it was occupied by Gumong, who clearly had no qualms about usurping the head of household's place. He turned to shoot Moshi an unconcerned glance. Moshi's face was cold as frost. "Get up." Gumong said nothing. He didn't move a muscle. Liwei coughed and hastily strode over to Gumong. "Quick, get up. The lord's angry." Gumong frowned. He didn't understand this phrase, the Lord. After all, Luomei Pavilion only had clients and managers. He looked at Moshi and assumed that Li Wei had addressed him by name. Are you called Lord? Gumong's pristinely blank expression infuriated Moshi. In lieu of a response, he stepped over and stared Gumong down. I told you to get up. Gumong still didn't budge, so Moshi reached out to yank him from the chair. Before he had so much as touched Gumong's lapels, however, the man leapt out of the chair and stood warily beside it. Although Moshi loathed Gumong, he wouldn't go out of his way to humiliate him. He was aloof and righteous by nature. He wouldn't do anything overly depraved unless pushed to the brink. He certainly wouldn't stoop to Murong Lian's level and send Gumong to a brothel. Still, he was grumpy from just having woken up, so he had even less patience for Gumong than usual. Li Wei feared the two of them would get into a spat and cause another scene, so he rushed in to admonish Gumong. Look at you. Of all the places you could sit in this massive residence, you had to choose Shihajun's place of honor. Who do you think you are? You'd better pay attention and learn the rules from me. Stupid. Moshi frowned in annoyance. Take him away. Yes, my lord. But Gumong refused. I want to sit here. As he spoke, he pulled out the chair on the other side of the table, planning to take a seat. Moshi's gaze flickered, as if that action had stabbed at some secret in his heart. You can't, he snapped. You can't sit there either. He paused briefly. Why do you want to be here? Gumong pointed at the table. Food. Moshi was speechless. I've seen it, said Gumong. Every day, food appears here. People bring it to you. Very tasty. He calmly met Moshi's chilly gaze. I'm waiting. You're waiting here for food? Moshi asked, his expression stormy. Gumong nodded. Moshi watched him silently for a moment. Then his lips curled into a sneer. Gumong, who do you think you are? He turned around and sat down. When he spoke again, he didn't even look up as he adjusted the silver weapon compartment hidden in the trim of his sleeves. Li Wei, get him out of here. Right away, my lord. Li Wei paused before asking hesitantly, what about the food? Doesn't he still have a pile of corn in his cellar? He can scram back there and chew on that. This time, Gumong spoke up before Li Wei could respond. It's gone. Asked Moshi. I ate them all. Moshi looked up. You hauled back 2 baskets of steamed buns, 4 or 5 ropes of sausage, and 7 pancakes. All gone. I don't know anyone in the dining room. Too many people. I won't go in, Gumong said haltingly, his eyes cold and clear. Can only come here. Why can you come here? Moshi asked after a moment. Because I know you. You gave me water. Gumong paused. You taught me life worse than death. You also bought my... Gumong was interrupted by the crash of a wine cup smashing into the wall. Moshi's eyes gleamed darkly. Shut up. Gumong did as he was told. Li Wei stood by helplessly, eyes flitting between the two. For the first time, he was at a loss as to how to smooth things over. Moshi sat at the table with his arms crossed and his expression icy. He gazed at Gumong inscrutably. After a spell, he raised his chin and asked, slowly, Do you remember anything else? Gumong cocked his head in thought. In the end, he shook his head. Moshi lowered his lashes and scoffed. He looked up again. Then get lost. But Gumong didn't get lost. He quietly stared at Moshi's face, his eyes neither beseeching nor subservient. When he spoke again, his voice was flat and dispassionate, as though simply informing Moshi of an objective fact. He stood right in front of Moshi, his gaze so frank as to be impudent, and insisted obstinately, "I'm hungry." The two locked eyes in a contest of wills. In the end, Moshi spoke first. "Fine, but you spent 2 years at Luomei Pavilion, so you should understand that meat pies don't fall from the sky. If you want to eat, then you need to work for it." Moshi leaned forward slightly, his sharp gaze bisecting Gumong's pale visage like a flashing blade that cracked his shell and aimed for the tender flesh beneath. His voice was deep and slow. "Gu Shixiong, I'll give you a chance to speak up for yourself. Tell me, what can you do for me?" Black eyes stared into blue, glinting with repressed hatred. "What do you want to do for me? What are you able to do for me? If you can convince me, I'll give you what you want. Just say it." Gumong looked at him in silence. A moment later, he held out an outstretched hand. Moshi's expression shifted. "What does this mean?" "You can beat me. I won't die." Gumong's face was devoid of emotion. But I get a meal for every beating. No beating without food." Moshi paused. "This is another one of Luomei Pavilion's rules?" "Yes." Moshi rose and turned his face away before he spoke. "Remember, this is Shiha Manor, not Wangshu Manor, and most certainly not Luomei Pavilion. I have no interest in abusing you." "What are you interested in doing to me, then?" A strange expression rippled faintly across Moshi's handsome face, as if he were recalling some unspeakable thing from the past. He quickly regained his composure and answered with icy arrogance, "How would I know? Why don't you offer your services?" Gumong was bewildered. "Offer? It means just say it yourself," Moshi replied grimly. Gumong thought for a moment, then tried to submit another of his possible uses. "Then, do you like to curse at people?" "Why is it either beating or cursing?" Feeling wronged, Moshi retorted, "Do I fucking look like that kind of person?" "Yes, you do. Can we go back to Looney Tunes bullshit, please?" "Yeah, same." Li Wei... I can't speak now. This has been too much of a roller coaster. Li Wei remained silent. Gumong pondered for a long while this time. When he spoke again, he sounded confused. "I don't know. I don't know what else I can do." He stared at Moshi with those infuriatingly earnest blue eyes. His elegant face, usually as calm as still water, now seemed anxious. "But I don't want to go back to Luomei Pavilion. I don't want to go back." Seeing him like this enraged Moshi for more reasons than one, but he didn't even know where to start. While he tried to tamp down his anger, Gumong piped up again. "I also know how to sleep and eat. Are you interested?" Faced with Moshi's silence, Gumong continued, "I also know..." He racked his brain for what further utility he had, until his face turned red from the effort. He couldn't come up with anything. Once he had been so strong and so clever, the most incredible young general in Chonghua. He was like a blazing flame that sparked with endless inspiration, power, hope, and love. In Moshi's eyes, there was practically nothing the General Gu of the past couldn't do. But his souls had been destroyed, his mind broken, and his fire extinguished. Now, this man was only the scorched earth left behind after General Gu had burnt out. "I don't know anything else," Gumong said eventually. He looked up at Moshi in resignation. "That's all I can do." Gumong had the precise expression of a beggar child who hoped desperately to buy a piping hot steamed bun, and had fumbled through his clothes to discover only a single grubby cowrie shell. He didn't know if it was enough, but he still held out his only coin as he bit his lip in worry. Do you want to use me? On further thought, Gumong decided he'd better address Moshi by what he thought was his name, Lord. Moshi, who was still playing with the hidden weapon compartment in his sleeve, nearly cut his finger open. He couldn't muster a reply for a long while. There was an itch in some corner of his heart that wasn't quite right. He indistinctly knew what this feeling was, and that it was dangerous, so he quickly looked away from Gumong. Don't call me random names. You knew me in the past. My name is Moshi, he said with a dark expression. After a moment's thought, he added brusquely, Forget it. You should call me Shihajun. Moshi fastened the weapon compartment shut and stilled briefly. He turned back to Gumong. Listen up. Shiha Manor isn't like Luomei Pavilion. No one will beat you or curse at you here. But because you're a criminal, you don't get a choice in most things. If you want to eat, you have to earn your keep. But I don't know. You used to know all these things, Moshi said. If you don't remember, Li Wei will teach you again. Behave and do as he says. As long as you finish your work, you can come get your food. I get food if I finish my work? Yes, but you can't slack off. Understood? Gumong nodded. Then go. Moshi glanced at the water clock on the side table. I want to know what a water clock is. Once you've done your work for today, you may come here for the evening meal. My lord, will you be needing another chair? Li Wei hastily asked. Why would I? Moshi shot him a tired look. Isn't there an empty one right here? Li Wei was at a loss for words. But haven't you been saving this ownerless chair for Princess Mengzi all this time, like the rumors say? Still he acquiesced, despite his confusion, and readied himself to leave with Gumong in tow. Before they reached the door, however, Moshi called him back again. Wait, come here. What is it, my lord? Moshi looked thoughtfully at Gumong, then said to Li Wei, Go to the dining hall and tell the head cook I have some requests for tonight's dinner. He spoke a few more words to Li Wei in a low voice, and then said lightly, That's all. Just do as I say. You may go. The first task Li Wei gave to Gumong was very simple yet thoroughly exhausting, chopping firewood. Shihajun is a cultivator, but most of the staff in our manor are ordinary humans. They can't summon a fireball with a wave of their hand, so we're still sorely lacking in firewood for the winter. Li Wei pointed at the small mountain of wood before them. Chop all of this. You won't get dinner until you finish. Gumong stared at the pile of logs, then looked at Li Wei without making a sound. Do you understand? Li Wei asked. If you don't, then ask. At Gumong's silence, Li Wei rolled up his sleeves and made a few chopping motions. Chop. Firewood. Do you understand? Cut up all this wood. Gumong didn't seem to fully comprehend his meaning, but he had grasped the most important word, cut. Without saying yes or no, he picked up the axe stuck in the ground and turned to Li Wei to confirm. Cut these? Yes, cut these. All of them? All of them. Can't eat until I cut it all? You can't eat until you cut it all. With that, Gumong turned and began to chop firewood without another word. Such work required little technique, but demanded a great deal of time and effort and was deeply dull besides. No one in Shiha Manor liked doing it, but Gumong had no complaints. With his lips slightly pursed and sweat beading on his long lashes, he threw everything he had into each swing of the axe, as if he held a deep grudge against these particular logs. His enthusiasm was unflagging. With every log that disappeared from the pile, he got closer and closer to his meal. By the time the sky had darkened, The mountainous pile of timber had become a great heap of firewood. Gumong tossed the axe aside. Without even bothering to wipe the sweat from his brow, he went straight to the hall to collect his reward for the day. Although it was snowing heavily and wretchedly cold outside, the main hall shone bright with candles. Dishes, kept warm beneath thick lids, were arrayed on the rosewood table. A clay pot of soup simmered on a small stove, wisps of steam escaping to curl into the air. Moshi sat there, waiting for him. That's the end of the chapter. I definitely thought the chair is meant for Gumong, but when he first sat in it, Moshi probably got mad because he's still having all the feelings about Gumong, thinking he's a wolf and all of that. So he probably was like, oh, Gumong is sitting in the chair, but it's not really him. Okay, this was a crazy 2 chapters. I think I'm gonna read the next one and then we're gonna take a break. Oh my god, okay, we're getting a food chapter. We're getting meat bun food descriptions. And I need to eat something on the break. So I'm just gonna sit here and read this and be hungry. This is chapter 44, which is called Crispy Roast Goose. Oh, War Dove. Water clocks work by slowly letting out water at a measured pace. Volume equals time. That's so cool. I need to look that up when I get a chance. Sit, Moshi said lightly. There was no one else in the hall. Gumong was certainly not one to stand on ceremony. He pulled out the other chair and quickly sat, then reached out and took the lids off the platters in front of him. There were 8 different dishes. Sea cucumber sautéed with green onion. Yellow croaker fish fried with green onion. Venison roasted with green onion. Beef stir-fried with green onion. Green onion tofu. Green onion egg drop soup, green onion pancake. As though someone in the kitchen had sworn a blood feud against green onions. The only dish without this vegetable was a whole roast goose, arranged over a charcoal brazier to the table's side. After an entire day of swinging an axe, Gumong was so hungry he felt like a hole had been punched through his stomach. Without a care for Moshi's reaction, he immediately dug in with bare hands. He spared not a glance for the jade chopsticks and plates on the table. First, he grabbed a yellow croaker fish and took a large bite. After chewing once, he spat it back out. Yuck. Moshi didn't bat an eyelash. He watched Gumong with elegant poise from his chair at the other end of the table. Try a different dish. Gumong reached for a piece of the roasted venison with green onion. After a few nibbles, he spat that out as well. Does it also taste bad? Then try another. This time Gumong hesitated, scanning the table full of dishes over and over. Cautiously, he picked a green onion pancake out of a bamboo basket. This time, he didn't immediately take a bite. He held up the pancake and sniffed at it, wrinkled his nose, then sniffed at it again, dissatisfied. In the end, he licked it, the tip of his tongue as delicate as a flower pistil. The sight of his flicking tongue seemed to stir something in Moshi's memories. His dark pupils glimmered as a hint of shadow flitted across his solemn features. He turned away. I don't like this green thing, Gumong said a few licks later. His complexion took on a sickly tinge. I can't eat it. That's hardly surprising, thought Moshi. It would be stranger if you had liked it. I knew he was testing him. Great numbers of people had once invited the former General Gu to share a meal with them, but very few knew his preferences. Gumong, subject to the Murong clan's strict discipline since he was a child, had a kind disposition. He would never consider pointing out what dishes he didn't like at a banquet. Instead, he always thanked others for their generosity. Not even Murong Lian who knew Gumong's disgust for green onion, despite living with him for so many years. Moshi, however, was well aware of it. "What's the green stuff called?" "Green onion," Moshi answered, expressionless. Gumong pouted. "Then I don't like green onion." Moshi didn't reply. With a twitch of his finger, his spiritual energy set the flames in the brazier roaring higher. The roast goose had been stuffed with berries and skewered on a branch to roast slowly over a fruitwood fire, and was now golden brown and crisp. Moshi sprinkled salt on it and picked up a small knife. He leisurely cut off one of the goose's legs and passed it to Gumong. "Try this." Gumong accepted the food, but after having experienced the nightmare of green onions, he was profoundly wary. He held up the drumstick and carefully inspected it, staring at the shimmering grease and burnished amber skin. Steam rose off it, carrying the savory aroma of meat and the smoky fragrance of fruitwood. Gumong swallowed unconsciously, yet still carefully asked, "There's no green onion?" "None." He bit down, the crispy, golden skin crackling between his teeth. The savory meat, running with hot juices and fat, instantly filled his mouth with flavor. Gumong polished off the drumstick in a few bites, even licking his fingers. Then he stared at the roast goose in the fire pit with shining eyes. "More," he demanded. Strangely enough, Moshi took no offense at being ordered about like a cook. He even thoughtfully pushed the dish of sour plum sauce in front of him over to Gumong. Then he carved Gumong a full plate of roast goose and watched his unbridled delight as he ate it, without taking a single bite himself. "Do you like this roast goose?" Moshi asked. Cheeks bulging, Gumong mumbled, "Yes." "That's good," Moshi replied. His voice was even, without inflection. "This is the only dish I made. Everything else was prepared by the cook." "Good job." Gumong tossed out a mindless compliment for Master Chef Mo before busying himself with the roast goose again. Moshi's voice clearly held far less allure than the goose's crispy skin. "Not really. I'm no good in the kitchen. A shixiong of mine taught me how to make this goose dish years ago, back when the two of us were stationed at a fortress on the frontier." Outside the window, snow flurries drifted down and onto the latticework, where they formed a layer of glittering crystal. Inside, Gumong was still engrossed with his food. Moshi spoke with a rare calm, like a beast trapped within the mire of memory, unable to summon its ferocity ever again. At the time, we were still low-level cultivators, looking out for each other within our own squad. Moshi paused. To be fair, it was more him looking out for me. He was 3 years my senior, and more advanced in both maturity and cultivation. Back then, I thought there was nothing on Earth he didn't know. Be it supernatural mysteries or roast goose, he could explain anything perfectly. It was winter then, too, and we had just fought a hard battle. The enemy soldiers had attacked our supply lines and cut off our provisions. Our troop didn't have enough food, and what little we had was distributed according to rank. As Moshi studied Gumong, his gaze, usually so sharp, was uncommonly distant. "Neither of us had enough to eat," he murmured. One night, we were on duty, patrolling on either side of the camp. I don't know how he did it, but in all that snow, he somehow brought down a fat goose. He could have eaten it all himself, but for some reason, he cheerfully called me over. You know, I was in the middle of a growth spurt back then, so my appetite was actually much bigger than his. At this, Gumong paused and looked up. After a beat of silence, Moshi asked, "What's wrong?" Gumong licked his lips and dragged his plate closer to Moshi. "Gimme another drumstick." Arching his brow, Moshi carved off the remaining drumstick and gave it to Gumong. Then, careless of whether Gumong was listening, he continued his story. He picked some berries from a tree. Gumong looked up and fixed him with another stare. Moshi pursed his lips. "There's no more. Each goose has only 2 drumsticks. Besides, you haven't even finished the one on your plate." But Gumong suddenly cut in, seemingly without rhyme or reason. "Berries are so good." Moshi paused and gave him a thoughtful look. "You're right, berries are good. That man also liked berries, and he often went to a lot of trouble to climb trees and pick them. He insisted that the difference between hand-picked berries and those struck down with magic was night and day. The roast goose recipe he taught me was very simple. Other than the goose, it only called for some salt and a handful of fresh berries. You eat it with the berries? No, the berries were for stuffing the goose. He skewered it with a branch and smoked it over pine and lychee wood, Moshi said. We sat by the fire pit, and he added branches from time to time. Once the goose was golden, he sprinkled salt on it and took it off the fire. First he removed the berries, then he dove right in. He warned me to be very careful. Careful of what? We'd kept watch over that goose and smelled it cooking for so long, staring as it crisped and browned over the fire, watching its drippings trickling down. Obviously, we were ravenous after all that and could hardly wait to take a bite, Moshi said lightly. It was hard to avoid burning our tongues. Did you burn your tongue? How could I possibly? Moshi's eyes were hazy and vacant. You, on the other hand. Gumong gnawed on the drumstick and licked his lips. Look, I didn't burn mine either. Moshi hesitated. That's not what I meant. Forget it. It doesn't matter. Pretend I didn't say anything. Thus instructed, Gumong paid no more mind to aught other than his meal. He ate half the entire goose, then fell into a stupor as he stared at what remained. In the end, he didn't eat any more. You're done? Moshi asked. Gumong nodded. Moshi found this somewhat strange. Gumong's appetite seemed formidable these days, so how could half a roast goose be enough for him? But before he could give it more thought, Gumong asked, Your Shishong, what was his name? This question was like an arrow piercing his heart. Moshi's head snapped up, and he met Gumong's eyes, which were clear and filled with open curiosity. In the face of that gaze, Moshi's heart slowly began to ache. Gumong, are you pretending? If you are, how could you be so calm? That person, Moshi paused. His name was... What was his name? It was 2 simple syllables, but they lodged in his throat, unutterable no matter how hard he tried. Moshi choked on that name. He had spoken those 2 words so many times before, but now they were like the shards of a tender dream that had shattered years ago, stabbing him until his heart and lungs were full of blood. He couldn't say it. Desperately, as he tried to endure the pain he felt, the rims of his eyes gradually reddened. He abruptly turned away, and when he spoke again, his voice was much harsher than before. What's the point of asking? What does it have to do with you? Gumong answered him with silence. Moshi's interest in the meal waned. After Gumong left, Moshi's gaze fell on the sour plum sauce that had been next to Gumong's elbow. During the meal, Moshi hadn't explained what the sauce was for, so it had gone completely ignored. It remained perfectly untouched. Closing his eyes, Moshi seemed to hear a familiar voice. Shidi, eating the roast goose by itself is no fun at all. Try this dipping sauce made from cooked plums. It's sweet and sour. When you take a bite of crispy skin with this stuff, whoa. The smile in that voice was audible. It's so good you'll want to lick the plate. Even now, Moshi could still remember certain details from back then clearly. The pristine blanket of snow on the ground, the occasional flurries of wind-blown ash, the brilliant flickering of the fire pit, and the person sitting by his side, laughing as he played with pine branches. Gumong. Gumong had turned his head, features bathed in the warm glow of the orange flames. His dark eyes were so deep and bright. Come, try this piece. I dipped it in sour plum sauce. How is it? Is it good? Ha ha ha, of course it is. When has your Gumong Guga ever lied to you? I'm the most honest man in the world. I've never tricked anyone. Moshi's fists clenched against his will, his nails sinking deep into his palms. He had specifically carved the goose into many thin pieces for Gumong to eat. He had also made a point of talking to Gumong while he ate, because he knew that people became more easily distracted when they were preoccupied with two things at once. In the past, whenever Gumong ate this kind of crispy-skinned goose, he absolutely had to dip each piece in the sweet and sour plum sauce. Even if he forgot before he took the first bite, he would pause and dip it in the saucer before continuing. This habit of his was deeply ingrained. Moshi had thought that if Gumong was pretending, it would be hard for him to keep his guard up while he maintained the conversation. Gumong probably would have dipped the goose in this sauce at least once, just out of habit. But he did not. Gumong seemed completely oblivious to the purpose of this dish. That congealed dish of plums remained every bit as untouched as it had been when Moshi had first set it down. In contrast, the hope that had filled Moshi's chest when he pushed the dish toward Gumong had gone. Snow fell heavily beyond the window, but the remains of the feast before Moshi seemed colder than the winter wind. Moshi didn't know why a spate of violent resentment suddenly coursed through his body. Hate prickled hot in him, and he lunged and overturned the entire table of cooled leftovers with an almighty crash. Liwei was drawn by the commotion. He rushed in to find Moshi by the window, exhausted, face buried in his hands. His head hung low, as if the loss of his hope had taken with it his will to live. "My lord, go away. My lord, why go to such trouble? It doesn't matter if he remembers or if he's pretending. The end result is the same. Why bother?" No, it wasn't the same. The Gumong he wanted, the Gumong he hated, the Gu Shishong he admired, they should all be whole. They should be capable of fighting him, of wielding a blade to meet or to match him. Only within the enmity of betrayal could he draw gasping breath. Only there would he have a future to strive for. Only there could he have the satisfaction of taking revenge. Only there could he have hope. Only there would he have something beyond this debilitating feebleness that felt like punching a wad of soft cotton. He had his hatred and his resentment, but he had lost the only target upon which he could set his emotions loose. "My lord, my lord!" A servant ran into the hall. Liwei turned instantly to nail him with a glare, mouthing silently, "Stop yelling! Can't you see Shihajun is in a foul mood?" The servant had the look of being caught between a rock and a hard place. After a moment's hesitation, he nevertheless bent his head and made his report. "My lord, a herald from His Imperial Majesty has arrived and is waiting outside." Moshi tilted his head minutely, his sharp brows knitting in a frown. "Herald?" "Yes." The servant swallowed nervously. "It's terribly urgent. He says that His Imperial Majesty, because of a certain matter of importance, requires you at once. The food. I'm also a little bit upset about the food being dropped to the floor. That's the end of the chapter. It's exactly 4 o'clock. So we can take like a 10-minute break. I really need to go eat something, especially after reading that. I wish I could just, take the food out of the book, but also all the emotions. That was a lot. And y'all, when we return, we're reading chapter 45, which is called My Turn to Chain You. So, okay then. I will be back in like 10 minutes. Hopefully I'll find something like half as good to eat. A quarter as good to eat as that. Yeah, it's a great title. So I will see y'all in a bit. Hello, I'm back. Sorry that took too long. um, I just made this, like, fish sandwich. We get these cans, they say they're sardines. You can buy these, like, really cheap cans of fish from Amazon. And it says it's sardines, but it's really just herring. And I had, like, fish on a sandwich with this, Italian pepper sauce on it. And it was so good. It probably wasn't as good as that roast goose, but that was, like, what I needed right now. Um, I can, like, I can try to find them, the ones that we get, and put a link here. Wait, let me see. I could probably find it really quick. Yeah, it's weird. I don't really know the difference between sardines and herrings, but, okay. We order, this. Hopefully this link works. It's, like, we just, like, have this on subscribe and save. And you can eat it in, like, so many different things. And they're really good. They're packed in water, and when you, like, drain the water out, it smells really fishy, but when you actually eat it, it's, like, not fishy at all. Anyway, just had to have a food moment. We are on page 129 for chapter 45, which is called My Turn to Chain You. As soon as the servant said, "a certain matter of importance," Moshi understood. Chonghua had an exceedingly shocking secret. One no more than 5 people in the entire country were privy to. And Shihajun was one of them. Moshi braved the wind and snow to travel to Chi-Chun Hall and followed the attendant into the depths of the palace. Coal fires burned merrily in the grand hall. The 2 golden beasts lying before the brazier were singing the emperor's praises as usual. "His Imperial Majesty's fortune floods the heavens," one of them cried. "His Imperial Majesty enjoys boundless longevity," crowed the other. All of the attendants and servants had already been dismissed. Only the emperor remained, reclining on the couch with his face strangely pale. "Your Imperial Majesty." "Stove, you finally come," the emperor said weakly. "If you took any longer, we'd be dead." Moshi said nothing. The emperor was being overdramatic, but this was indeed Chonghua's unspeakable secret. The emperor was ill. The ruler of the nation was afflicted with a freezing illness, a chronic disease for which there was no cure. Although it wasn't immediately life-threatening, its progression was dependent on the patient's constitution and their fate. It could take as few as 10 to 20 years, or as many as 30 to 50 years, but in the end, the illness paralyzed the body. Which was to say, no matter how much care the emperor took with his health, at best, he would succumb to complete paralysis when he reached his 50s. At the sight of the emperor's weary expression, Moshi sighed. "Your Imperial Majesty, please relax," he said. "I'll take the cold from you." The emperor nodded and leaned back against the cushions. He rarely had such obvious weak spells. Flare-ups of this freezing disease caused tremendous suffering. Only after a fire elemental cultivator drew out the cold and restored the blood circulation could the patient feel some relief. For this reason, the emperor sometimes called Moshi his stove. I was wondering about stove. I was like, is that a typo? What is he calling stove? The emperor closed his eyes while Moshi transferred fire elemental spiritual energy to him. After a few minutes, the purple tinge around his lips finally faded. Without opening his eyes, The Emperor sighed. Thankfully you were in the capital. Otherwise, we would have had to suffer. Even though Medicine Master Lin also has a fire elemental core, his spiritual energy is not as great as yours. He wouldn't have been able to resolve our problem like you did. The little golden beasts were still shrilly singing from beside the coal basin. Fortune floods the heavens. Boundless longevity. The Emperor snorted. Fortune? Longevity? Bullshit. In the past few months, our disease has flared up more and more often. Who knows how much time we've got left? If our illness was made known to the court... He sneered. Heh. Those slavering beasts would probably rush to disembowel and devour us until nothing remained. At this point, he finally opened his eyes a sliver and gave Moshi a canny look. If such a day should ever come, Shihajun would guard the doors of the palace hall for us, wouldn't he? Moshi disliked such circuitous talk. He knew the Emperor was trying to ascertain his loyalties, so he said directly, The vow of calamity has already been sworn. What doubts can your Imperial Majesty possibly have? The Emperor laughed. We're only having a little chat. But Moshi knew this was no idle conversation. The Emperor's position had come at a price, and he was suspicious of everyone. Many years ago, the Emperor's birth mother had bribed the court physician to hide this illness of his. But the secret had been revealed when the previous emperor was near death. The late emperor thought that, if his son weakened while on the throne, Chonghua would be subject to threats from within and turmoil, threats from without, and turmoil from within. For the sake of his country, the late emperor had considered stripping the then crown prince of his title. But the late emperor was not blessed with many children. He only had this one son, as well as his two daughters, Yanping and Mengzi. If he disinherited his heir on his deathbed, would he have to appoint his daughter as emperor? It was a ludicrous thought. The ascent of a female sovereign to the throne was completely unheard of in all the 9 provinces and 28 nations. The late emperor considered his brothers, as well other sons who had been adopted into the Murong family. It was said that he had even intended to test the mettle of the child Murong Lian. Oh, so Murong Lian is adopted into the family? ? But before the late emperor could make alternative arrangements, his condition took a turn for the worse, and he passed not long after. The masses were kept ignorant of the reason the late emperor had thought to demote the crown prince on his deathbed. It was widely believed that delirium caused by his worsening illness was to blame. The few who knew the secret had been marked with the most terrifying secret-keeping sigils, and thus hid the truth of the new emperor's disease deep within their hearts. The pleasant warmth of fire energy flowed through the emperor's body, gradually dispelling the pain brought on by the freezing disease. The emperor closed his eyes in repose for a spell. By the way, he suddenly spoke up, Stove, it's been some time since Gumong was brought to your manor. Has everything gone smoothly? It has. The emperor fell silent. After a long moment, just when Moshi thought he'd dropped the topic, he continued. Do you recall when we sent you a letter asking for counsel on Gumong's punishment 2 years ago? You hadn't much to say back then. But upon your return, I've noticed that your views have changed. Moshi didn't respond, instead continuing to quietly help the emperor expel the cold. The emperor didn't turn to look at him. He reclined listlessly on the low couch and continued to speak casually. Stove, we know you're a devoted man. When you aren't in the presence of Gumong, You only remember the ways in which he mistreated you. But when actually faced with him, you can't stop yourself from thinking of him as your brother and comrade. Is this not so? Drops of water pattered down from the clock in the hall. When the Emperor's cold had finally been dispelled and he no longer felt so unwell, he sighed. In truth, you're still conflicted. We can tell. Moshi remained silent. You remember his malice, but you're unable to forget his kindness, the Emperor continued. You hate that he yet lives, but if you were to really see his blood spilled, your heart couldn't handle it. Your Imperial Majesty. This is only natural, the Emperor said wearily. In all honesty, we've known how highly you still regard your old camaraderie since the day you took the vow of calamity to protect the Northern Frontier Army without hesitation. That knife dug into your heart, but it didn't gouge the past from your flesh. You cherish those old sentiments. There's nothing wrong with that. The cold had been fully dispelled. The Emperor sat up and began to straighten his clothing, and his features regained their usual stubborn willfulness. While he smoothed the creases in his robes, the Emperor looked up, fixing his eyes on Moshi as he spoke. But there's something we must tell you. A consideration that comes first. Moshi didn't immediately answer. Your Imperial Majesty need not warn me. I feel nothing for him. The Emperor chuckled raucously. If you truly felt nothing, you wouldn't have come to ask us for him. He retrieved a bracelet from the red sandalwood table and slowly fiddled with the beads. Back then, you thought nothing of giving up a decade of your life, of taking on a lifetime's commitment to protect the soldiers he left behind. You even faced down their hostility to become the stepfather of the Northern Frontier Army. Now these acts of protection are supposed to be hate? Do you think we're foolish or blind? Moshi held his tongue. The Emperor was no longer smiling when he continued. Be that as it may, we wish to remind you that Gumong is guilty of the crime of treason. The reason we've allowed him to live thus far is not in deference to either of your reputations, but rather because he is still useful. As the Emperor spoke, his gaze did not waver from Moshi's face. Gumong is an enemy, and his crimes are unpardonable. Chonghua's citizens are all eager to see his head struck from his neck. The day we are finished with him, or he can no longer be controlled, we will issue the decree for his execution. Moshi's lashes quivered slightly. On that day, we don't want to see you get confused and stand with Gumong. Moshi usually accepted orders with decisive quickness, but now he was silent. The Emperor arched an eyebrow. If there's anything you'd like to say, Shihajun, you should say it outright. There isn't really, Moshi replied. Truly? He did commit those crimes. His guilt is indisputable. Ah, why are you so boring? Shihajun had done as the Emperor wished, yet somehow this made the Emperor feel rather dissatisfied. Why can't you at least make a cursory attempt to beg for leniency and let us refuse you, then beg us again, only for us to refuse you again? That way, when you beg a third time, we can get thunderously angry and liven up the whole court with some excitement instead of the staid tedium. Moshi paused and looked up. Then I do have a request. Ah, that's more like it. I want to do it myself, Moshi said. What? The Emperor asked in astonishment. On the day of Gumong's execution, I want to do it myself. Give us a moment. The Emperor held his forehead as he muttered, How come it's not going the way we thought? I ask your Imperial Majesty to permit this request. The Emperor had been rendered temporarily speechless. He sat motionless for a long while before he leaned back and clapped his hands. Truly, dearest friends and mortal foes, you gentlemen are so interesting. Oof, indeed. Oh, I'm looking back at the chat. Blue turnips, making like half of the people in stream go eat without being in the room is power. Meat Bun really had that power. I know now we're getting back into the serious part. Moshi looked back at him without comment. The Emperor's light brown eyes flickered as he continued. We fear you won't be able to do it. If the time comes when I cannot, I will hand it over for your Imperial Majesty to decide. The Emperor stared at Moshi's face for some time, as if he wanted to unearth something from the other man's eyes, but failed to in the end. He heaved a sigh. Shihajun, why bother? He's just a brother from your youth, yet you insist on keeping watch over him, whether in life or in death. Ah, you. In this lifetime, I've only had this one brother, Moshi said. Both love and hate have passed through me. I no longer have any attachment. I only have this one request, and I hope that your Imperial Majesty will grant it. The Emperor spun his string of beads and considered it for a moment with his eyes closed. His mouth split into a grin. We won't. Moshi said nothing. A gentleman's word is gold, as they say. You won't convince us so easily. The Emperor opened his eyes and set his bracelet down. This matter is best discussed at a later date. Moshi seemed to have anticipated this and replied with no discernible surprise. Very well. The Emperor, on the other hand, was taken aback. Somewhat indignantly, he said, You won't carry on? Beg us again? We'll refuse you again? Beg once more, and then we can lose our temper, and thus liven up the court? Moshi refused to indulge his sovereign's perverse sense of humor, and instead bowed in obeisance. Seeing as your Imperial Majesty has completely recovered, I won't continue to impose. The hour is late. I'll take my leave. I need to know what Moshi, is planning. What does he have up his sleeve right now? I cannot figure it out. The Emperor pursed his lips. Fine, get lost. You're no fun at all. By the time Moshi returned to his manor, it was the dead of night, and most of the inhabitants were sound asleep. He strode through the main hall with displeasure written across his face. Moshi felt that he and the Emperor were quite incompatible. Whenever the two spoke in private, they both ended up annoyed and unhappy. Expression stormy with frustration, he kicked open the door to his bedroom, intent on washing up and going to bed. He looked around the room and promptly stopped in his tracks. Li Wei, he roared, come here. This angry snarl resonated through the entirety of Shiha Manor, making the plants tremble and scattering the fish in the water. Afraid that he was in danger of losing his head, Li Wei scrambled forth as fast as his feet could carry him. Ayah, my lord is back. Your servant was just feeding the horses in the stables, and thus was unable to welcome you. My lord is magnanimous. Thank you for your forbearance. Moshi turned his head darkly, his gaze raking down Li Wei's figure, like a pair of cold blades, before eventually returning to land on his face. He stepped aside to allow Li Wei a good look at the situation in his room. Explain. Moshi's expression was grim, his tone cold. I merely paid a visit to the Imperial Palace. What happened here? Li Wei craned his neck to see, and, oh boy. The room was, how best to put it, Moshi's severe perfectionism and somewhat pathological tendency toward cleanliness meant his quarters were always meticulously neat. Forget any items out of place. Even the bedding needed to be folded with sharp and exact corners. Yet at this moment, the desk and chairs had been tipped over, the bed and curtains were a mess, the pillows had fallen onto the floor, and a flower vase had been tossed on the bed. In short, it looked as though a thief had slipped in and barreled through the place like a maniac. Trembling, Li Wei turned to look at Moshi's bloodless face, a cold prickle at his nape. He mumbled, I'll investigate at once. Get the hell out, Moshi snapped. Li Wei nimbly scuttled away. Before the span of time it took to have a cup of tea had elapsed, he scuttled right back in. Moshi was still standing in the room, staring at his bed. He turned to address Li Wei. What do you have to say? He asked stiffly. Li Wei wiped the sweat that had beaded on his forehead from his run. He's one hell of a talent, he said, adding with a softer mumble, honestly, what the hell? Li Wei swallowed audibly, the jut of his throat bobbing. He struggled to find the words he needed. Finally, just as Moshi was about to lose his temper entirely, Li Wei slapped his thigh and exclaimed, It's simply impossible to describe. My lord, come with me to take a look. That fiend is a damned genius. Moshi had heard enough of Li Wei's vague pronouncements, so he followed him to the woodshed in the rear courtyard. If said structure could still be described as a woodshed, that is. Moshi had no words. Truly a damned genius, Li Wei exclaimed yet again. Within the space of one evening, an ordinary shed had been surrounded by a dozen Taihu stones. There is a footnote. Limestone rocks weathered intentionally in Lake Tai to achieve gnarled shapes and perforated surfaces, treasured as decorative fixtures in gardens and courtyards. Moshi thought he recognized a few. They'd apparently been appropriated from the fish pond. Various tables, chairs, and stools, collected from all corners of Shiha Manor, were balanced upside down on top of the stones, with all their legs pointed toward the sky. The shed's entrance resembled a hedgehog, with all its quills sticking up. Someone had swiftly and single-handedly turned the Shiha Manor woodshed into an impenetrable animal den. Anyone with half a brain would be able to guess the creator of this masterpiece. Li Wei's eyes were sharp. He pointed to the blanket hung over the entrance and wondered out loud. Huh? Shiha-jun, isn't this from your bed? Yes, of course it was from his bed. That was the snow silk blanket he meticulously folded every morning, and now it had become the curtain to the Bandit King's lair. Li Wei, afraid that Moshi might really make himself sick from anger, hastily spoke up again. My lord, this is a good thing. Moshi was feeling faint. Good? He bit out. Think about it, Li Wei wheedled. Before, Gumong was seeking out the rice barrel and wine cellar as hideouts. What did that mean? It meant that he was ready to flee at any time and wouldn't listen to commands, my lord. Not even yours. And now, Li Wei cleared his throat and continued in a firm voice. Gumong has, with great effort, furnished himself a custom bedroom in Shiha Manor. Moshi pressed a palm to the pounding vein in his temple and cut Li Wei off. I didn't realize your eyesight had gotten so bad. No, you're right. It's not quite a bedroom. Li Wei took another look at the fortress of Taihu stones and, after a moment's thought, landed on a more suitable turn of phrase. Den. He's built himself a den. He continued. Animals build dens, and birds build nests, for the same reason humans build homes. To settle down somewhere for a long time. This demonstrates that Gumong has been tamed by my wise and powerful lord. From now on, he'll be aware that he's here on account of your generosity. If my lord says to go left, he wouldn't dare go right. If my lord says to stop walking, He wouldn't dare move, even if someone threatened to break his bones. Li Wei was still spouting this eloquent stream of flattery when a rustling came from behind. The two turned just in time to catch Gumong hauling over a pile of bedding that he'd filched from who knows where. A scraggly black dog followed at his heels. It looked to be the same one that had been inseparable from him at Luomei Pavilion. At some point, the dog must have snuck out and gone on a quest to return to Gumong's side. All of them, 3 humans and 1 dog, came abruptly face to face. Blanket thief Gumong froze in place. So did Moshi. No one said a word. After a beat of silence, Gumong noisily flung the bedding over his head and calmly asked, "Can you still see me?" It took Moshi a moment to reply, "What do you think?" Gumong fidgeted uneasily beneath the blankets. Then he turned on his heel and sprinted away, feet pattering against the ground. The black dog ran after him happily, barking at every step. Just as man and dog were about to turn the corner and vanish, Moshi shouted, both furious and flabbergasted, "Get back here!" He was ignored. Gumong's footfalls only quickened as he sped up. Moshi leveled an icy stare at Li Wei, who was standing to the side, engrossed in the spectacle. "What was it you said?" he bit out. "Say stop walking and he won't dare move?" Well," Li Wei replied guiltily. "Gumong was once the beast of the altar, after all. His beastliness still remains, even though his mind's a shambles. But look, my lord, he's much more willing to talk to you now, isn't that so?" If this isn't foreshadowing Gumong stealing his clothes once they get back together, oh yeah, he's gonna be that type of partner. Moshi responded in a towering fury. "Talk to me? What nonsense? Why haven't you dealt with the mess in my room yet?" "Right away," Li Wei said, stepping forward to take the blanket from where Gumong had hung it over the Taihu stones. Moshi stopped him. "What are you doing? Putting it in the laundry?" Moshi was choking on rage. "You think I'd still want a blanket Gumong used as a curtain?" he snapped. "Go to the storeroom and grab a new one." Li Wei made a quick noise of assent and diligently ran off. Moshi remained stuck where he was, staring first at the hastily retreating man, then at the corner around which Gumong and the dog had disappeared. Finally, he turned to stare at the den Gumong had left behind. He raised his hand to massage his nape, which throbbed with stress. It felt like he had exhausted a lifetime's worth of anger in these few days. Fucking hell, at this rate, he might as well go back to guard the frontier. If he continued to suffer trial after trial like this, he could probably ascend. However, Shihajun, General Mo, was young yet. He was blunt and taciturn, with all his emotions written on his face. Unfortunately, the court was unlike the military. Here, passionate loyalty receded like the tides, while political intrigue and two-faced lies surged in. It was clear that his frustrations upon returning to the imperial capital had only just begun. Indeed, another round of annoyances awaited him. A group of old nobles, normally timid, had hatched a plan. They reckoned Shihajun had his hands full with work, which meant he couldn't possibly watch over the bastard Gumong every minute of the day. If the scoundrel was once again exploited by someone like Li Qingqian, or if he was plotting something in secret, it would pose too many risks. Therefore, those old nobles presented a jointly signed document to the emperor, requesting that Gumong be locked back up in prison. "Didn't Li Qingqian break him out of prison all the same?" Moshi asked coldly. "That was because the guards weren't vigilant enough. If there were more of them, surely—" "Surely what?" the emperor interrupted. We have already given Shihajun permission to take custody of him. If this agreement were so easily revoked, what would that say of us?" The old nobles fumed and glowered and refused to back down. They started to wail miserably. Vexed by the commotion, the emperor yelled angrily, "Fine, fine, fine, damn it. How about a compromise? Shihajun, go get Gumong marked as a slave as soon as you can. It'll keep the criminal from escaping and reassure this lot somewhat." At the words, "marked as a slave," Moshi's heart stuttered. He looked up at the man on the throne. The emperor arched an eyebrow. Is there something Shihajun wants to say? A pause. "No," Moshi answered quietly. He closed his eyes. To be marked as a slave meant being collared. In accordance with Chonghua's laws, any operation involving a slave collar, whether fitting it or removing it, needed to be approved by the emperor and carried out by an artificer. That collar Murong Lian had covertly put on Gumong back then was an unauthorized one. Later, after Gumong had achieved great merit in battle, the late emperor had issued an edict to overturn his status as a slave. Naturally, the collar on his neck was removed as well. The old emperor had given Murong Lian a severe tongue-lashing over the matter. That day, Moshi had been the one who accompanied Gumong to the artificing workshop to have the collar removed. He had been wholly delighted for his Shiga, thinking his Shiga was so good. He should be free all his life. That Moshi had never imagined there would come a day when he, as Gumong's new master, would lock that symbol of degradation and ownership back around his own Gu Shiga's neck. That's a lot. Oh, okay. The next chapter, well, it's 447. I want to read the next chapter. Like, we might go over a little bit, but I don't think it'll be too bad. And that is chapter 46, which is called Owner. As the court was in recess the next day, Moshi took Gumong to be registered as a slave. In most countries, slaves had no status. They were not permitted to cultivate or attend school, and were referred to as the underclass. Chonghua wasn't fundamentally much different from the others, but it did treat slaves with a touch more lenience. Under the late emperor, Chonghua had abolished the demeaning term, the underclass, and made exceptions for slaves with aptitude. These few could enter the academy and cultivate spiritual cores. The late emperor had even appointed someone born a slave to the rank of general, and thereby allowed them to organize troops and serve their nation. These actions had once stirred enormous controversy in Chonghua. The old nobles put up fierce remonstrations one after another. History has proven this to be a mistake, they said. The appetites of slavering beasts are insatiable. Your Imperial Majesty, if slaves are given a bit of power, they'll hunger for even more. What they meant was, if slaves were allowed to learn cultivation and establish themselves, it was only a matter of time before they would start eyeing the throne and rise in bloody revolution. Who would want to get trampled underfoot? But the old emperor didn't listen. Fire beacons were lit all across the 9 provinces, and skirmishes between nations grew more intense by the day. The old emperor thought that anyone with the appropriate talents should be allowed to put them to use. Even if civil conflicts were avoided, the threat of external conflicts still loomed. These were the circumstances under which Gumong and his Wangba army had risen to fame. However, every emperor established his own court. When the new emperor succeeded to the throne, he feared civil conflict more than external threats. He took these fears out on Gumong. demoting him and removing him from power in order to appease the established noble clans. This was how the current situation came to be. "We're here," the coachman announced. The carriage pulled up next to a small shop near the Cultivation Academy. Moshi stepped out and knocked on the shop's door, which stood slightly ajar. The cramped entrance led to an old and dilapidated shop. A single wooden board, carelessly propped up outside, was the only sign, and it had been boldly inscribed with the words Tsushin, Artificing Forge. Tsushin means kind heart. Part of the red paint on the word forge had worn off. "Where are we?" Gumong asked. Moshi didn't answer. He pushed open the flimsy old door and led Gumong inside. The interior of the shop was poorly lit. There was no direct sunlight, and the room reeked of rotting wood. The stubborn proprietor was too stingy for lamps, and relied solely on the light from the smelting furnace. Before that furnace sat a hunchbacked old man, slowly working the bellows. Red embers flickered madly within dark smoke. Oh, and there's a footnote. That is a quote from 17 Autumn River Songs by Tang Dynasty poet Li Bai. Red embers flickered madly within dark smoke, and dazzlingly orange molten iron flowed into the grooves like magma pouring from the depths of the earth. "Uncle Song," Moshi called out. The old metalworker was fully engrossed in his work. He was rather hard of hearing and hadn't noticed the movement behind him. Moshi raised his voice. "Uncle." Only then did the old man turn his head, the fire's light shining on his wrinkled face. He looked exactly like a tangerine left out in the sun for too long, shriveled and yellow. Blankly, he looked at Moshi, then turned his gaze on Gumong. Realization dawned on his face. He scrambled to his feet and bowed unsteadily as he muttered, Oh, it's General Gu." Gumong remained rooted to the spot, thoroughly perplexed. Upon noticing that the old man was making obeisance to him, he clumsily mirrored the gesture. After a moment of silence, Moshi said, "He hasn't been General Gu in a long time." The doddering Uncle Song asked blankly, "Is that so? So what is he now?" "A prisoner." Astonished, Uncle Song stared blankly at Gumong for a long while. "Prisoner. A prisoner," he muttered. He took a slow step forward and grasped Gumong's hands in his wrinkled palms. After a befuddled pause, he smiled and began babbling incoherently. "Aya, Xiaogu, you've lucked out. See, Uncle didn't lie to you, did he? There are more good people in the world than bad. From now on, you'll no longer be a Wangshu Manor slave." As he spoke, he jubilantly patted the back of Gumong's head. "Come, Uncle will take off that collar on your neck." Yeah, this is painful right now. The old man's nonsensical mutters sent a flash of agony across Moshi's vision. He closed his eyes and his throat bobbed as he swallowed. Just as he was about to speak, he heard a muffled noise from upstairs. The wooden steps creaked, and a gentle voice called out, "Shihajun, what brings you here?" Moshi turned to see a man in flaxen robes hobbling down the stairs with his cane. It was Jiang Yeshue. Jiang Yeshue was the owner of this artificing forge. Uncle Song had been an artificer in Yue Manor, and had been Jiang Yeshue's first and oldest mentor. After Jiang Yeshue was cast out of the Yue clan, this old retainer was the only one willing to take him in. "I brought him to be registered as a slave," Moshi said. Jiang Yeshue was startled. "Who?" Moshi turned his tall and stately figure to reveal Gumong behind him, who was looking around inquisitively. "Ah, General Gu," Jiang Yeshue muttered. Uncle Song wasn't about to be left out of the conversation. He slapped his disciple's back with one bark-like hand. "Today's a good day, Yeshue. Take a look," he said happily. "Our Xiaogu's made it now. Isn't he the first slave to have his status revoked? How hard it must have been." After a moment, Jiang Yeshue sighed. "Shifu, that all happened long ago." "I misremembered something again?" Uncle Song asked, perplexed. "Yes. Back then, I could still walk and run." Jiang Yeshue lowered his lashes and smiled as he spoke to the old man. "Shifu, you're tired. Why don't you go rest?" Jiang Yeshue helped the old man out of the room and settled him before he returned to Moshi and Gumong. "My apologies, Shihajun. Shifu hasn't been making much sense these past few years. Please don't hold it against him." "Of course not," Moshi replied. Gumong blinked and echoed Moshi's words. "Of course not." Moshi glanced at him. Today, the gaze he leveled at Gumong wasn't sharp, but rather slightly cryptic, as though enshrouded in the shadows of the past. Jiang Yeshue saw all this pass between them and heaved a soft sigh. "If he is to be registered as a slave, please follow me upstairs." "But your legs," Moshi began. "I have the cane." Jiang Yeshue smiled. "Don't worry, I can walk." The trio climbed to the second floor of the smelting shop. It was much brighter here, with all sorts of weapons made from condensed spiritual energy hanging from racks on the walls. Nowadays, the weapons wielded by cultivators were most often forged with spiritual energy. After a cultivator went to an artificing forge and selected a weapon they liked, the artificer would meld the weapon with the cultivator's spiritual core. Whenever they wanted to use the weapon, they only needed to think the incantation and the weapon would be summoned. These types of weapons weren't as powerful as holy weapons, but they were still formidable, as the principles behind their creation were similar. In an effort to create even more fearsome weapons, artificers traveled the land to seek out different types of spiritual ingredients. The beaks of fire phoenixes, the claws of Jiao dragons, the tusks of sky-swallowing white elephants. The more fiendish the spirit beast, the stronger the spiritual power, and the more formidable the resulting weapon. Some artificers even forged vengeful spirits into their weapons, which would summon said spirits in battle. The water demon talisman passed down through Wang Shujun's family was an excellent example of this. Rumor said it had been created with 9,000 drowned ghosts that seethed with resentment. Yeah, Blue, this is some cool world building right now. I love this. Like learning a little bit about spirit swords. That's a nice break from everything that's happening. The same idea was also behind the forging of the sword spirit Li Qingqian. But Jiang Yeshue's artificing forge was different. Forget the old man downstairs, half-blind and ridiculously senile. Jiang Yeshue himself was a soft-hearted man whose kindness bordered on absurdity. He couldn't bear to step on an ant, let alone fight phoenixes and slaughter dragons. The thought was completely ludicrous. "The spiritual energy we use in our weapons is all derived from flora," said Jiang Yeshue. He turned and saw that Moshi was staring at his windowsill, which made him feel somewhat self-conscious. The spiritual forms drawing on the sill were all soft and pliable. One could tell at a glance they were not very useful. The kids from the Cultivation Academy come here to buy weapons. They're unlikely to hurt themselves with these. "There's nothing wrong with that," said Moshi. Jiang Yeshue offered him a small smile. His artificing techniques had originated within the Yue clan, but the way he put them into practice was entirely different. Yue Juntian pursued sheer power above all else, and Murong Chuyi didn't care if his inventions were cruel. Since he was a boy, Jiang Yeshui had always clashed with his father due to their philosophical differences. It was often the case that, unless they met with extreme suffering, people's beliefs were difficult to change. However, Moshi thought that even if Jiang Yeshui hadn't lost his wife, he still would have eventually parted ways with the Yue clan. Jiang Yeshui retrieved an iron box from a shelf piled high with artificing materials. He brushed off the dust and brought it over to Moshi and Gumong. Years ago, Moshi had accompanied Gumong to remove his slave collar, so he was intimately familiar with this box. Knowing this, Jiang Yeshui hesitated and glanced at Moshi. "Shihajun, I'm about to perform the spell," he said. "Would you like to step out of the room?" Moshi's features were perfectly composed. He looked at that pitch-black box without any hint of emotion. "I'm fine." "Okay, then I'll begin." Jiang Yeshui put the box on the floor and then spoke to Gumong. "Gu." He had already opened his mouth, but he still didn't know how best to address him. In the end, he sighed. "You, please sit. Close your eyes. Put your hand on the box." Gumong calmly obeyed the first two requests, but he refused the last one. He opened his eyes again, stared at the box for a time, then finally mumbled, "I don't like this thing." He looked up at Moshi. "I'm leaving." "Sit down," said Moshi, leaving. "If you want to stay at Shiha Manor, then you must do as this person says," Moshi warned. Gumong didn't really have a choice. He pouted, looking both wronged and wary, but after a moment's hesitation, he put his hand on the box. "Perform the spell," Moshi told Jiang Yeshui. Jiang Yeshui nodded. Back in the day, Murong Lian's slapdash procedure for conferring a slave collar had been badly conceived. The collar's inherent power was considerable, so putting it on carelessly could cause the wearer's spiritual energy to go berserk or even result in their death. However, no one in that crowd of youths back then had been aware of these risks. The master artificer Jiang Yeshui lowered his gaze as he chanted the incantation. Nigh instantly, a stream of black spiritual energy issued from the hole in the iron box. It coiled like a snake along Gumong's arm, from his wrist to his shoulder to his collarbones. At last, it looped itself around his neck and coalesced into a ring of black iron. The final tendril of smoke became a little tag hanging off its side. "It's done." Gumong opened his eyes and touched his neck without a word. Very quickly, he reached up again, this time turning his head and mumbling pensively, "Necklace." Moshi was leaning against the window, all long legs and narrow waist. Why did we need that information right now? When he heard Gumong say this, he stared blankly. "What? Did you give me a necklace?" Gumong asked in astonishment. Silence. Moshi didn't respond, but Jiang Yeshui couldn't help himself and nodded. At this, Gumong's blue eyes sparkled brilliantly. He touched his slave collar again and again, his face shining with cautious joy, looking every bit as kind and gentle as it had in the past. He turned to Moshi and said, "Thank you." A humid breeze blew in through the window, ruffling the wisps of hair at Moshi's temples. He stood with his arms crossed, wordlessly studying Gumong's profile from a few feet away. The Gumong before him was like shattered fragments of the former General Gu. Moshi wanted to see the shadow of his old friend in him, but in the end, this was all he would get. Those jagged shards left the rims of his eyes red and stinging. While no one was looking, he closed his eyes in despair and swallowed with difficulty. Many years ago, it had also been on the second floor of Cixin Forge, in this very room, that the young Gumong had likewise touched a slave collar, his smile radiant. That collar had been removed by Uncle Song. It's over, Gu Shixiong. You won't belong to Murong Lian anymore. Moshi, gazing at Gumong's face, had solemnly said, You're free now. Back then, the collar was being taken off, and Gumong had been smiling. Time had slipped between them, bringing change with its passage. Now the collar was being put on, yet Gumong was still smiling. Now, nothing seemed to have changed. But Moshi felt as though a bitter olive was stuck in his throat, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't swallow it. The bitterness felt like it would follow him for the rest of his life. Wait a moment, Jiang Yeshue said to Gumong. It's not over yet. I still need to add a few words to this necklace. What words? Your name and registry number. He flipped through Chonghua's slave registry records to look up the number of Gumong's collar. Here, 790. Gumong didn't know what this meant. He sat listening without comprehension. Jiang Yeshue used spiritual energy to engrave those characters into the collar. After he finished with the front, he flipped the tag around. This time, he looked not at Gumong, but rather at Moshi, who stood with the light from the window behind him, his face cast in shadow. Shiha-jun, as for the other side, let's not, Moshi said. But I'm afraid it may be against the rules. If we're not inscribing an individual's name, it should at least be a noble's family name or the name of the manor. None of that is necessary, Moshi paused, then turned away. Jiang Yeshue sighed. But the other side still needs to be engraved? Gumong piped up. With what? It does, Jiang Yeshue told him. It needs to be engraved with your lord's name. Gumong furrowed his brow thoughtfully for a moment. Just as Moshi was about to impatiently tell him they were leaving, he suddenly said, I know whose name to carve. He turned to look at Moshi. Yours. A pause. What are you talking about? Moshi retorted. You're my lord. Lots of people call you that. Moshi closed his eyes, brows dipping in a deep frown. You talk too much. Hurry up and come with me. We can't engrave your name? No, Moshi snapped. For some reason, the mere thought of his name inscribed on something looped around Gumong's neck sent a burst of frustrated heat coursing through his blood. He shook his head in annoyance, as if shaking off a mosquito that disturbed his peace. Grabbing Gumong by the back of his robe's collar, he pulled him upright and said to Jiang Yeshue, Qingshu Elder, farewell. I'll see you off, Jiang Yeshue replied. There's no need to trouble yourself with your condition. Jiang Yeshue smiled. It's nothing. Don't worry about it. Besides, I needed to go to the West Street for some pine oil today. For some pine oil anyway. Wait a moment. I'll grab some money. Where's your wheelchair? Moshi asked. I'll fetch it for you. It's not good to be sitting all the time. My cane will suffice. Jiang Yeshue slipped some coins into his Qian-kun pouch. Let's go. The three of them headed to the general shop on the West Street. Jiang Yeshue asked the shopkeeper for 2 jugs of pine oil. As he was waiting for the shopkeeper to fill the bottles, the curtain at the door fluttered and a youth strode in. Hey, shopkeeper, the youth hollered. Have all the things we ordered arrived yet? The shout was followed by a cold and stern voice. Behave, Yue Chunqing. Don't jump around like that in here. Moshi and Jiang Yeshue turned their heads to see Yue Chunqing, who had just blown in like a winter gale. One step behind him was the white-robed Murong Chuyi. Neither party had expected such a chance meeting. The two groups stared at each other blankly. Murong Chuyi seemed especially taken aback. His severe phoenix eyes fell on Jiang Yixue and immediately narrowed. Neither spoke. The atmosphere turned tense. Murong Chuyi's older sister was Yue Juntian's first wife, while Jiang Yixue's mother was Yue Juntian's concubine. Both women had since passed, but the events of those years remained fresh in the memories of these two members of the younger generation. Chuyi, Jiang Yixue said quietly. Murong Chuyi didn't say anything. With a sweep of his sleeves, he turned to leave. Yue Chunqing hastily tried to call him back. Fourth uncle. But Murong Chuyi had already lifted the curtain and walked out of the shop. His frosty voice filtered backward, filled with palpable anger. Yue Chunqing, nothing good happens when I come out with you. In a moment of desperation, Yue Chunqing completely ignored Jiang Yixue as he stomped his feet and cried, Fourth uncle, it's not like I knew he was here. Don't go. Wait for me. But Murong Chuyi replied, Don't follow me. How could Yue Chunqing dare disobey? He stood there dejected, looking back at everyone else. The room fell quiet. Jiang Yixue let out a sigh and finally broke the silence. Chunqing, Chuyi still treats you like this? And there's art. I guess that's, I'm actually not sure. Are we looking at, Murong Chuyi and, yeah, I'm not totally sure who the other person in the picture is. But the art is cute. At least it's, like, not horribly painful. I was worried that we would get art of, like, the recollaring scene. The best part about Saint illustrating both Arha and Yuwu is how, like, Chuaning and, Murong Chuyi look. Exactly. Yeah, it's Jiang Yixue. Okay. For some reason, I expected Jiang Yixue to look older or different. Maybe, but I don't know. Anyway, that's the end of the chapter, and that's where we're stopping for today. So that was a lot. That was definitely a roller coaster because it went from like Looney Tunes to I am hungry to like I am trying not to cry. But Meat Bun is good at that. When we come back on Monday, we are gonna be on page 157 for chapter 47, which is called Important Person. Another fun chapter title. Yeah, that was a lot. A lot is certainly a descriptor that fits. Well, I hope you'll have a good rest of your week and a good weekend, and I will see you next week. Have a good one, everybody. Thank you for coming.